Hey there, and welcome back to Transformers the Game. It's been a while, hasn't it? I don't know about you, but I've been really missing this game lately. I've just been really low on ideas for it. But I was thinking, a lot of you may not know this, but my first introduction to Transformers and Transformers the Game was back on the Wii. And one main thing about the Wii version is that it was confined to the low-res assets. And I haven't played that in years. But honestly, part of me wants to go back and see if I can't relive any old memories from that time. That, and I really want to see a detailed comparison between the low-res maps, characters, and the high-res ones, because I think there might be some very interesting comparisons to be had. Now, I'm not going to do a full-fledged playthrough of the game, so what you see will be a bit of gameplay, but I'm going to primarily focus on the comparisons between maps and characters. That's my goal for this series. And I guess the best place to start would be on the menu right now. Alright, well, I think the low-res assets look a bit cleaner. Well, at least they do in person. Apparently in recordings, they look about identical. But why waste time? Let's start a new game. And see if we can't relive some memories. I think I'll start with the Autobot campaign first, because I think that is going to be a little more interesting. But again, not doing a full-fledged playthrough. Think of it more of as a combination of that and the comparisons. But yeah, we'll start with the Autobot campaign, and we'll hit up the Decepticons in the next episode, so we'll kind of be jumping back and forth here. But for now, let's go with the bots. Suburbs. Here we go. Okay, here we are at the Suburbs. Oh, cubes. That sure has been a while since I've seen them. Alright, well, this should be interesting. Let's see what we got around here. Wow. Yeah, this bee kind of bringing me back. Oh, there's the old bot symbols. Been a while since I've gotten any collectibles. Don't call it a phone. Get out of here. Well, why don't we jump into the comparisons? And why not start with Bumblebee himself? So here is the high-res Bumblebee we're used to. You know, pretty detailed, pretty sharp. Nothing really to complain about, I guess. Let's see the low-res. Oh, wow. He is missing a lot of the detail that the high-res one has. The parts are a lot more simplified, and one common theme I have noticed with low-res characters is that they have a lot of parts that are transparent on the back. But in general, he's way more simplified, way less detailed. This is especially true for his textures. Now, the high-res characters typically have like 3 sets for robot mode, right? You've got your usually upper body, lower body, and inner parts. You know, each of those having 3 textures, the spec, normal, and diffuse. Low res only has 1, and my goodness, these things are puny. I mean, to be fair, some of the high-res characters had 256 by 256 textures, but at least they had like 3 split up between different sections. This is all in 1. And oh my word. Another interesting note is that while the high-res assets use normals to get a lot more extra detailing, the low-res do not. Instead, the only additional shading you get for the low res are a speck texture, which is about 64 by 64, so that's really darn small, and a simple reflection shader, which doesn't look that great compared to full-fledged normals. So, way less detail. I honestly didn't know they didn't have normals until I looked into it. Anyway, his weapons, interestingly enough, seem to be the same textures as the high-res, though they seem to be compacted into one. So that's nifty. It's likely most of the low-res models were based off of very early concept art compared to the high-res ones, which are a lot closer. This will be especially noticeable in some later characters, which I'll go through when we get to them. Now, moving over to vehicle mode, I can make out a few more obvious differences. For one, the Camaro seems to be a little bit cleaner than the high-res one, and one particularly notable thing is that his left window is partially rolled down, and his racing stripes seem a little different. They seem to end a bit shorter than they should, and it looks like they're missing their outline, so this may have been based on a concept design for the Camaro before it was finalized. But moving over to the textures, you kind of have the same deal. Instead of the two individual textures you would get for the interior of the car and the exterior, they're all rolled into one, and they are still 256 by 256. Again, you have no normals, just that really small speck and the simple reflection shader. Though, interestingly enough, the wheels seem to be shared between robot and vehicle mode, compared to the high-res, which I think had individuals for both. That's quite an interesting change. Interesting. Well, now that we've covered Bumblebee, let's take a look at how some of the specific map areas have changed around the city. So let's start with where we first arrived. The original high-res version seems to have a brown color for the pavement and a repeated grass texture all throughout. And compared to the low-res, you get something a bit different. The pavement is actually now gray, and there's a bit more of a dirt texture sprinkled around. Actually, the low-res one looks a little bit better. So some of the low-res sections may actually end up looking better than the high ones. Let's see if that trend continues. Up next, we have the baseball field Tranquility Sparks, which, looks, pretty detailed. It's what we know, right? Compared to the low-res, oh wow. Okay, right off the bat, I can see that the low-res section has no street lines in the parking lot. It's also quite a bit darker. Also, the logo for the Tranquility Spark signs is a bit different. Looks like the Tranquility text is a bit smaller, as is the baseball. But it looks like the seating area looks a lot more detailed. It's got a nice green-white banner covering the top, compared to the simple, flat, solid surface that the low-res has. And the chairs look a bit more spaced out. Otherwise, the general structure of the setup is about the same. Let's look at another angle. High-res has this bold-looking pattern again. Pretty much the same stuff I've already mentioned. But the grass pattern on the low-res is a lot more, faded. You can't make out the details as nearly as good as the high-res one. Oh, and something super different, the high-res has the outer edge of the field all grass, and the low-res has some pavement. I did not know that. Again, otherwise, they seem to follow the same general placement for objects. Moving on to Metroplex has some really significant differences that I've spotted. First of all, Metroplex has the cinema logo and a moving sign on the front buildings here. Compared to the low-res, there is no cinema sign, and that text is just a white solid banner that does not move. Also, the pavement pattern and color is a bit different. It seems a lot darker on the low-res, and the tiles seem a bit bigger. There's also no cover above the windows. It's just empty with a sale sign, which high-res might have a smaller one. but not nearly the same as the low-res. Moving to another angle, seems like we got a few more billboards on the high-res version, as the low-res does not have a pawn shop, and it actually has a signs of robotics sign that the high-res does not. Otherwise, the Metroplex sign seems about the same. Alright, interesting. Moving on, we have the gas stations, which seem to follow the same general design, just a lot more detailed for the high-res. Oh, but the top of the gas station is a different pattern. Low-res is red, white, and blue, and high-res is red and green. Also looks like the signs at the top of the station are a bit more, degraded on the high-res. Interesting. Now, let's move over to Bumblebee, which, by the looks of it, has again a much darker pavement color. Vehicle placements are surprisingly about the same, though I do notice the van is yellow for the high-res and white for the low-res. But otherwise, the high-res has the fine women billboard, and the low-res has none. Nothing too different. Moving on, we have the power plant, which seems similar for the most part, though I can obviously tell that the high-res has a much more detailed path. It's got a nice edge pattern following it around. Those explosives are far more detailed in the high-res version, for sure. But generally, not a lot different here. Alright, next we have chip chases. Now I already know there's some differences with this. First off, low-res has none of the detailed windows and posters of the high-res. The pavement is also completely different on the ground. Instead of the tile pattern you got going, just got some simple gray pavement. Nothing too special. And the high-res has a bigger tile pattern for the building than the low-res. Also, the low-res has more chip signs than the high-res one. Now that is interesting. And the drink model, from what I can tell, is either facing a different direction or it's a different model. Though it seems the straw for the low-res has a red line. A bit more differences than I previously thought. The business park seems about the same again. I do notice some weird edging for the high-res roads that the low-res does not have. Another interesting bit to note is that the right building does not have a door. Still has a fire escape, but no door. Moving on, we got the construction site. This is, again, another case of the low-res kind of blending better than the high-res. I just think the dirt and grass textures just clash way too much. The low-res just has a much more natural blend that I much prefer. Looks like some buildings are different, though. That building at the second to the left is a totally different shape from the low-res. In fact, it looks like the low-res has a shadow for it. And you also get a different sense of atmosphere in general. The low-res feels like it's kind of on a slightly cloudy day, whereas the high-res seems like it's right around dawn or something. It's definitely a lot more bright and cheery than the low-res one. Well, that about covers it for the map portion. Let's jump back into gameplay and see what other differences await. Here's our old pal Scrapper. He doesn't look too different from an initial viewing. But let's get a more detailed look to know for sure. Here's high-res Scrapper. You know, just for a basis on what we're going with here. You know, it's got a nice reddish orange. And here, oh my, is low-res Scrappy. Well, his color seems to be a little bit, more orange. Though I do notice he seems to share his optic texture with his spark chamber. And you can see semi through it. Well, let's move to his textures, which have the same general design as Bumblebee. Instead of having the 3 or so textures for his robot mode, he has them all compacted into one. And, it looks a million times worse than Bumblebee. I don't even know where half these parts even go. It seems like he has way more black parts than orange, so I wonder how this guy is exactly textured to have all that color, because he does not have a lot of color on this texture map, so they've got to be picking it from a very small point on him. Though I will say one thing. While the Autobot and Decepticon forklifts share a armor texture in high res, they do not in low res. That kinda bums me out, because I never liked how changing a texture for Scrapper would carry over to Spoony. But interesting that they made that distinction here, even though I can't tell you what half of these textures even do. Moving to vehicle mode, it seems like we got a much less defined version. Duh. I can't really notice much, but I do know that the low res has some individual texture pieces for the details, as his vehicle has some transparent sections that are likely used for specific sections. But you notice there's only like a few pixels of orange on this dude. So that guy must get all of his color from that one spot. Wow. It's kind of like what they do for some of the traffic cars, but to be that small on a character like this, you cannot do much with that. Well, I think that's about all I can say for Scrapper. Let's get back to the game. Ah, there's a new one. A rolled buddy dropkick. Okay. I can already notice a few things with him. So, high-res dropkick, as you know, has one of the more glaring issues with the improper weighting on his sides there. That has always bothered me. And if you compare that to the low res, he does not have that problem, which really sucks. But oh my goodness, you could really see the transparent issues on his back, especially on his thighs. That's just, ugh, so bad. So, moving to his textures, Dropkick is again super condensed. He's got all his stuff packed into one texture that is super low quality, but it's a bit more defined than some of the others, because at least I can make out where each point is. I could probably manage to skin this if I wanted to, but yikes. Compare that to the high-res version, which has the same free. Yeah, I gotta give points to the high-res one, even if it does have that annoying weight issue. Well, moving over to vehicle mode, I'm not noticing too many obvious differences. The low res compared to the high res is actually mirrored, so you don't have that missing blue stripe on the right side. Moving to textures, the low res is definitely mirrored, as the high res has a full Decepticon logo, and the low res just splits it in half. But again, the UV map here is not as bad as it could have been, since you can make out most of what each part does. Color seems close to the same, though I think the high-res is a bit more bolder and a bit more purple. Alright, let's get back to the action. Hopping along a little further, we have Chapter 2, where we have Swindle. And this guy's got some really surprising distinctions. Some good, some really bad. One of the most fascinating distinctions is that Swindle's side door logo is actually an individual texture shared in robot mode, compared to the high-res one, which was just skinned onto the base texture. This is honestly a touch I wished they used more often for the high-res characters, because there's a lot of instances where that could have been really helpful. They also did the same to his Decepticon logos. Otherwise, the vehicle models do not look all that different. Looking at his textures, he's another complicated mess. I couldn't even tell you where most of those red sections even go. And it's such a low quality. Ugh. Compared to the high-res one, which is a lot more obvious and easier to work with. If they just combined the separate logo meshes with the high-res body, that would have done it for me. But it's not so bad, you know. Well, moving on to robot mode. Oh, get ready for this. Here's high-res Swindle. Pretty sharp looking. Nicely defined. And here's low-res. I think this is one of the worst offenders when it comes to a low-res versus high-res. Because low-res Swindle is a real chunky boy. Seriously. Just look at his torso. It's so wide. And his head is so puny. The high-res just has this nice, bold stature that I've always liked. He's probably my favorite drone in the entire game. But low-res just looks awful. There's just so many missing details on the back. He's got more obvious, transparent rear sections. He's just hideous. Although, one cool feature about him is that his spark chamber kind of glows. He's got like these bright orbs around the center, which is a really cool touch. I wish they'd stuck with it. But otherwise, he is an abomination and I never want to see it again. But his textures, yeah, another low-res jumbled mess. It's just hideous, impractical, and dumb. And I'm done talking about this. Let's move on. Jumping ahead again, we are at Chapter 3, where we've got dear old Barricade. Now, I'll cover him in a later episode, but he's probably the most nostalgic part of this game for me. I don't know what it is, but something about that low-res version of Barricade just sticks with me. I don't know why. Either way, high-res or not, he's gotta go down. Though I will say, low-res or high-res, you can get some really amusing moments. And somehow, he survived that. Wow. But yeah, all in all, I much prefer the high-res assets over the low-res ones. Though I will say, this is the quickest I've ever seen Barricade go down. Jump. And with that, I think we can conclude our Tranquility high-res, low-res comparison. All in all, there were quite a few interesting surprises to be found. But in conclusion, I much prefer the high-res assets even though there are some decent elements to be found in the low res for sure. Well, I think that will cover it for this episode. Let me know what you all thought of this. Does seeing the low res assets bring some memories back to you? Are you intrigued by some of the differences? Let me know in the comments down below. We will continue in the next episode with Blackout at Qatar. Till then, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Stay tuned for more Transformers the Game stuff coming along. I will see you in the next one. Till then, stay superb in the suburbs.